National season is a wrap, and now we move on to the next of the competitive events and seasons this year, and that's Skirmish, which is going to be equal parts Blitz and Living Legend, and I will be doing some Living Legend content as we lead into that because I'm really excited to see where that format goes. But today we're doing a Blitz deck tech of perhaps my favorite hero in Blitz right now, and that's the Emperor. I like this dude so much, he's actually the background on my phone. Yes, this animation is the background on my phone. So I'm going to share with you my Emperor list. It's done quite well for me. I've put a lot of time into it, and I've broken it down for you into hopefully easy to digest bits so that you can pick the deck up and try it for yourself this Skirmish season. Let's start off by talking about who we're playing. If you don't know, Emperor Drakai of Aesir is a 4 intellect, 15 health, Royal Draconic Warrior Wizard Hero Young. Yeah, that's a mouthful, but I mean, he has to have all those titles. He's the Emperor of Volcor. I mean, come on now. Well, he was, until he was unfortunately and unceremoniously assassinated by Arachne. Nevertheless, you may only have red cards in your deck is his deck building restriction. It's a pretty hefty restriction, especially when you look at his actual hero effect, which says action, pay 3. That means usually pitching 3 red cards or doing some trickery, which we'll talk about in a little bit. Search your deck for Command and Conquer. You attack with it, and then you shuffle. There are some crazy things that you can do with this. We'll talk about probably a little bit later, but to wrap your head around it, we can only build a deck with red cards, and at any point, if we want to, we can tuck our hand, essentially, and throw Command and Conquer at our opponent, just pulling it from the deck and placing it on the next open chain link, which is pretty cool. That being said, the deck itself is, the way I've constructed and played it for a long time, a more mid-range defensive game plan in general that has equal parts attack action cards and arcane damage, and we pivot between our play styles of those two types of cards based on what our opponent does and what our opponent presents and what our opponent has the capacity to do. And so let's talk about why I've constructed it the way I have and what each piece of the puzzle serves to do. Starting with the main board equipment, these are the pieces that you will run in 90% of the matchups. One of these is the exception to that rule. Everything else is the rule. Starting with Waning Moon, this is the only weapon in the deck. It is the only weapon, in my opinion, that Emperor really needs to be messing around with. Yes, you could, throw in the sword that allows you to kind of create and play around some arcane damage, but I think this is where you need to be. The fact that it just allows you to play out some smooth turns and be able to use extra resources, which you will gain effectively and sometimes, to deal extra damage is quite good, especially if our opponents are not presenting a lot of arcane barrier or respecting the amount of arcane damage that we can push. This allows us to kill them on their turn as well. Arcanite Skullcap basically says gain 3 life because we are a squishy wizard at 15. We gain 3 health with this. It's immediately turned on in this format unless we're playing the mirror, and therefore we have the ability to block 2 and then block 1 with this very effectively. Flamescale Furnace is a linchpin piece to this deck. Go get it, go run it, because this allows you to play out most of the things that you could do in this deck. This cheats us resources. We pay an entire card to gain resources for each red in our pitch zone, and if we play this right, then we will be getting multiple resources off of this throughout the game. Stormstriders is another linchpin card. This is how we often win the game. We do not have access to the top of our deck. We do not have access to just about anything at instant speed except via Stormstriders. We're a warrior wizard. In this case, that means we're not really playing at instant speed until it's time for us to blow our opponents up, thanks to Stormstriders. And finally, this is the exception to the rule I mentioned earlier, Metacarpus Node. I used to be, and I will talk about it because it's in the sideboard, on the Braveforge Bracers completely, totally. I didn't even have Metacarpus Node in the list. And then I accidentally left them in my hotel room at Nationals, and so I played Metacarpus Node throughout the entirety of the weekend because I kept forgetting to get the other one out, and I am a believer in this card now after playing it into all those games. Why? Because it allows us on specific combo hands and turns to push 10 damage instead of 9, and that is a massive difference when our opponents think that they are alive through certain amounts of damage, and it turns out that they're not. In fact, I will say Metacarpus Node won me like 2 to 3 games on its own, being the ability to just kind of push this over. thanks to the +1 that you can add to specific sideboard and main board spells. We'll talk about that when we get there, but it's don't sleep on this card, because I did and I was wrong to do so. It is now the main board for me that I will side out if I need more defensive options. Nevertheless, very good card. So I mentioned that we are halfway on attacks and halfway on spells, so let's talk about the attacks first. Of course, we have Command and Conquer, because we do want to be able to use the effect that is provided to us on our hero power by paying 3 at times, and we can Flame Scale Furnace to get to Command and Conquer ranges by throwing Command and Conquer. Also, it's just a good card. It's a popper into a lot of like illusionist matchups. It works in a lot of great ways for us. The fact that we can tutor it is even better, of course. Everything else here besides Standing Order has a go again in some way, shape, or form, and Blaze Headlong is one of the best because we are only playing red cards, and if we play a red card, we can then follow it up with Blaze Headlong. So oftentimes, if we're leaning into this package of cards because our opponent has like AB3 and like a Spell Void or something like that, then we will try to set up turns where we go for like go again off of one of these other cards into Blaze, into something else that's big, or a spell at the end of that, right? So this is one of those enabling cards. The same thing is true with Ravenous Rabble, probably the best card as far as attacking in the deck because it costs us nothing. It will always be a 0 for 4 go again. It shows us the top of the deck so we know it's coming, which is quite nice as well. It's a way for us to both do arcane damage and physical damage on the same turn because we can start with this and then play a spell after that. So it's a fantastic card. Life for a Life, also very worthy card. This is one of those cards that allows us to pitch to play it. It will most likely have go again because we have less life than all of our opponents unless we're playing the mirror. So starting off, when we see this early game, Life for a Life will be a pitch a red, which is really good for us usually. Attack for 4 with go again. If it hits, sure, we gain the life, but then because we have one pitched, we can pitch a second card to Flame Scale Furnace and then do things with those resources, which is quite nice, like play Command and Conquer or something like that, right? E-Strike is a fantastic card in our deck because we can basically keep a 2-card hand after blocking and then play E-Strike for 7. Or if we wanted to, E-Strike for 5, go again, and then play out a 0-cost spell from Arsenal, something like that. And then Scar for a Scar is just good. It's more often than not turned on. Sometimes I get into games where I've, blocked so effectively and dealt damage so effectively that this actually doesn't have go again. And in those cases, I'm like, you know what? If the Scar for a Scar doesn't have go again at any point, you're winning the game. That's okay. And then finally, Standing Order. This used to be Wounding Blow. Believe it or not, yeah, I played Wounding Blow in this deck because it was a 0 for 4 that blocked for 3, and it still just pushed a breakpoint, which is great. We want to push breakpoints because we want to get our opponent's life lower. Now Standing Order does that even better because if we have an Arsenal for some reason and we kept this card in our hand, we can actually make this a 0 for 6, which is great. But notice, a lot of these cards right here are blocking for 3, but even more of them block for 2. And so by playing these attack action cards that are either generic or draconic, we are not blocking as well as we could. And so balancing that out, we have an equal number of spells that allow us to both deal arcane damage, but also block quite well. And those look like this. By the way, a lot of people that I've seen aren't super big on the 0 for 3s, and I would disagree because I believe the 0 for 3s are some of the best kind of pivot hands that you can possibly have, where you block, 3 cards out of your hand and keep a 0 for 3, or 4 cards and this is in your arsenal. The ability for you to block effectively with a lot of these cards and then throw 3 arcane damage that your opponent either takes immediately or pitches a blue or possibly even like a yellow or red to gain. Apparently there's a duck in my house because a duck call just rang out from my children. Nevertheless, the ability to throw these 0 for 3s at like opportune times after blocking very well puts you in a very good spot throughout the games. And so I'm a big fan of these 0 for 3s. I run Aether Dart and Sap in the main board with Prognosticate we'll talk about in the sideboard. Doesn't really matter. You can run any of these ones in the sideboard if you really like Prognosticate as well. Nevertheless, I run 3 of them. 1, 2, and then the third one in the sideboard. Those are our small arcane damage package, right? We can play those on a 0-card hand, like that's our hand, or a 1-card hand, that's the hand, right? We can play those out and deal damage. Aether Quickening and Scalding Rain both function in a slightly different manner, because what we can do is we can pitch a card to play Scalding Rain, right? Dealing 4 arcane damage, and then pitch another card from our hand, so this is a 3-card hand, to activate Flamescale Furnace. In doing so, we would gain 2 resources and then Waning Moon for a total of 6 arcane across 2 sources. So our opponent can AB into multiple times of that, but nevertheless, we are still presenting 6 arcane damage. So if our opponent presents AB1 and is content to use their equipment to block our conventional attacks, then Scalding Rain and Aether Quickening punish them heavily. Yes, they can technically like Arcane Barrier for this Scalding Rain and then for the Waning Moon, but who cares? Because we can throw mass chunks of arcane damage. The same thing is true with Voltic Bolt and Swell Tiding. They are our large scale package for arcane damage. They deal 5 apiece. They are more expensive and they are clunkier. I will say this, there's nothing, there's no way around it. Swell Tidings and Voltic Bolt are certainly clunkier in this deck because they do cost 2, and it makes it difficult to be able to play those. And so they oftentimes make their way into the arsenal and then come out on a kind of a back and forth turn. Nevertheless, into opponents that have, Arcane Barrier 3, this chips over it still. And even into opponents that have Arcane Barrier 1, this deals massive amounts of damage. You're not following it up oftentimes with the Waning Moon, but it doesn't matter because you're already dealing big chunks of damage. And then finally, Emeritus Scolding is oftentimes how we kill our opponent. Well, I shouldn't say that, not anymore. I would say Emeritus Scolding is sometimes how we kill our opponent. The fact that it deals 6 damage to them on their turn is quite good. And that can go up to 7 with Metacarpus nodes, but more often than not, it doesn't, because we're trying to weave in the Waning Moon as well to push to 9. Now, this is where we come in to the conversation of Emeritus Scolding plus Waning Moon equals 9, and that being the breakpoint that everyone plays around. But there are some really cool lines that you can actually do with some other cards and the Metacarpus node to push to a breakpoint of 10 that our opponents sometimes aren't expecting, and we'll talk about those as we look at the sideboard. To fill out the main board, though, we do play Fate Foreseens, Sink Belows, and Tome of Imperial Flames as sort of these defensive cards, and then this is just a very big power card that can do some crazy things, and Nimblism to kind of fill out our sides for buffing up our attacks if we want to do that, and it also is a non-attack, so if we go attack into pitch for like Waning Moon, because the Nimblism activates that, sometimes we can mix up our damage that way. Talking about the sideboard, I did want to remind you we do have Braveforge Bracers in. This again was the main board for the longest time. Now I've pivoted it over because I do like the breakpoint of 10 being our kill range. We have 2 sets of poppers to add to this. Battlefront Bastion, it was just an overperformer. This was a fantastic card in a lot of my matchups where I actually needed a popper. Did really, really good work. Fyendal's Fighting Spirit, same sort of thing, gaining us a life. This preventing an extra ping was great against OG Prism that was throwing heralds, because we would pop a herald and then they would swing like a spectral shield and we would just say, nope, no, not interested. Irina's Prayer I added in after losing a mirror when my opponent found both of their Irina's Prayers and just kind of blew me out of the game over the course of a couple of turns because they stopped big chunks of my damage. And I was like, wow, that was really good. And so I went and I got a couple of these, and then I played them in the sideboard, and I ran into the brand new wizard, a Blaze, and proceeded to win that game because I found both Irina's Prayers. So it paid off greatly against that Blaze, as they were not able to do a lot of their shenanigans because Irina's Prayer said no, and I have red cards on the top of my deck, so that's just no to all the arcane they want to present. Talked about Prognosticate already. It's in the sideboard because we want to add that in if our opponent presents low amounts of Arcane Barrier. If you expect your opponent to be on less Arcane Barrier than AB3, this card's great to add in, and you can just swap whatever you choose out. I'll talk about more of what you would swap out, or technically, because we have a 36-card main board, you just pick 4 of these cards and you can add them in. Hence why we have 4 poppers and these 2 as well. You're going to add these 2 into low AB matchups. If your opponent is going to present AB3, which more and more people are doing, these cards won't have as much utility. Now, finally, we talk about Reverberate, and the reason that Metacarpus node is so good. Reverberate opens up so much for this deck that it shocks me that people aren't playing it. This card is not as heavily played as it should be, and it should be. Because it is a 1 for 3 that when it deals damage, opens up your hand to something that you can play and kind of extend. So what you can do with this, and honestly, the best way is for me to just show you. Let me jump into a game. Okay, so here's an instance of how this functions. It is a fantastic interaction that I think more people need to be aware of. We have Reverberate in Arsenal. This is basically a 10 damage combo that a lot of people aren't expecting because they normally expect to play around Emeritus, pitching 2 resources, and then of course pitching 1 for the boots, and then the last one becomes a Flamescale Furnace activation so that you can Waning Moon for a total of 9. 6 plus 3 is 9. But what we can actually do instead is pitch to Stormstriders, and then we can play Reverberate, pitching here, and on the Metacarpus node stack, we can Flamescale Furnace pitching here for a total of 3 resources gained. Now, with these 3 resources, we have Waning Moon for 3, and then we have the resolution of the Metacarpus node trigger. Now, we have 1 extra resource floating because we pitched 3 cards and we have access to this. This didn't cost us 2, that's the difference. So we can pay this to make this Reverberate hit for 4, which then opens us up for 4 damage plus 3 damage equals 7, and then Reverberate's effect lets us have this 0 cost spell that we've kept in our hand come out for an additional 3 damage. We can't pay for this, but this presents 10 damage on our opponent's turn. And if our opponent taps out, kind of goes hands up and just says, show me what you've got, we can kill from 10 rather than 9. But it can also function in this capacity as well, and this technically turns off Metacarpus nodes. So this is the benefit of running the blocking equipment, the Greyforge Bracers, because you don't need Metacarpus node to still push 10 with this combo. But this is why Reverberate's so freaking good, because you do the exact same thing. You play the Reverberate, and you pitch for the Reverberate, and then the Reverberate's going to connect at the right time, of course, if you're dealing the right amount of damage and you've kind of calculated this out. Even if it deals 1, it opens up Scalding Rain to us, which we can then, of course, do the exact same thing, pitch to Flamescale Furnace. That gets us 3 resources. We can play Scalding Rain for 4, so that's 7 total, and then Waning Moon for 10. So we can push 10 damage even without Metacarpus nodes. But the benefit of node is that we don't have to rely on drawing the specific combination of Reverberate plus a 1-cost spell to push 10. We can now do the same exact thing with a bunch of 0 cost, which again benefit us greatly because the 0 cost spells are also just really good in this back and forth style of game that you might want to play. So here's an example of why 0 for 3s are good. I put a 0 for 3 in my arsenal, and now I'm presented with, let's just say it's a massive attack, something that's going to just like destroy my hand or destroy, I don't know, my arsenal maybe, I'm not sure. But we have decided on this turn cycle to defend, and we can defend with everything and just say, you know what, I'm going to block this out. And even in doing so, we can present something that requires them to pitch like into this arcane barrier, otherwise they're taking 3 damage. That is a huge benefit on blocking 4 and playing our arsenal for free. On a deck that is very resource hungry, the 0 for 3s bail us out in a lot of scenarios. So this is where I am with Emperor. It's been fantastically fun to play. I have this exact deck in paper in front of me. I almost made this like an old school deck tech where I just put everything out in front of me and just talked through it that way, but I thought it was a little bit more organized to present everything like this instead of just kind of like all strewn about and talking about it this way. This is the deck. The sideboard is easy. Feel free to take it and run with it. Dive in and see how you feel. I think it's one of the best decks in Blitz right now. It has the ability to block out with equipment into the right matchups, and it has the ability to really punish people for not respecting arcane damage as well. So I'm big on the Emperor, and if you enjoy deck techs like this and you want to see more Blitz deck techs or Living Legend deck techs or even Classic Constructed deck techs, let me know that in a comment below. Also, for those that are on Patreon, I will send this. I will kind of talk about it a little bit in updated form on the Patreon, so you have access to this and a little bit more of a breakdown than we got last time. If you want to join the Patreon and see that, feel free to check the link in the description as well and become a member of the Patreon to support the channel, and you can make the number go slightly higher as well, because numbers going up, that's where we want to be. I like numbers going up steadily. As always, everybody, thanks for watching.